Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. It all started on a quiet Thursday afternoon, the kind where time seems to move slower than usual. I had just finished folding the last of the laundry, the scent of lavender still fresh on my hands, when I settled onto the couch with a cup of lukewarm coffee. It was supposed to be my moment of peace. A rerun of Murder, She Wrote was playing, my guilty pleasure. But then, with a flicker and a pop, the TV screen went black. At first, I assumed it was just a loose cable or a power surge. I fiddled with the remote, pressed every button I could think of, even tried unplugging and replugging everything, but nothing worked. Just static. And silence. Now, I've never been what you'd call tech-savvy. I know how to log into Netflix, and I've mastered the art of online grocery shopping, but anything more complicated than that? Well, let's just say it's outside my comfort zone. That's when I thought of Henry. Henry, my next-door neighbor, had moved in about 2 years ago after his wife passed. A quiet man in his early 60s, polite, and always with a gentle smile. He kept to himself mostly, but we'd exchanged enough polite conversations over the fence and occasional help with yard work that I felt comfortable asking him for a favor. I slipped on my cardigan, brushed a few stray hairs behind my ears, and walked over, cup still in hand, feeling a little silly for needing help with something so basic. His house looked just like mine, modest, well-kept, a garden out front that bloomed with those tiny blue flowers I could never remember the name of. I knocked lightly on the door. After a moment, I heard the sound of footsteps, slow and steady, and then the door creaked open. "Hi, Henry," I said, smiling. "Sorry to bother you, but I think I've done something to my TV, and, well, I was wondering if you might take a look." He blinked a few times, caught off guard maybe, then his face softened. "Sure," he replied. "Let me grab my shoes." Back at my house, he stood in the living room, looking over the tangled mess of cables behind the TV, while I stood nearby, trying not to hover. "You know," he said with a chuckle, "you've got half of Best Buy plugged in back here." I laughed, maybe a little louder than necessary. "That sounds about right. My son set it up before he moved, and I've been too scared to touch it." He crouched down, fiddled with a few things, and within minutes the screen blinked back to life. The familiar music from my show filled the room, and I let out a relieved sigh. "There we go," he said, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Just a loose HDMI connection." "HT. What?" He smiled. "Never mind." I offered him coffee as a thank you, and to my surprise, he accepted. We sat in the sunroom, the one I always kept neat but rarely used. The late afternoon light streamed in through the glass panels, casting warm patterns on the wooden floor. "I never come in here," I confessed, handing him a mug. "Feels like a room meant for someone else's life." He sipped slowly, looking out at the backyard. "It's nice, peaceful." We talked for a while, about nothing and everything. I learned he used to teach high school shop class. He told me how quiet the house had been since his wife passed, how he'd started wood carving to fill the time. I listened more than I spoke, but there was comfort in that too. As the shadows grew longer, something shifted between us. A kind of stillness. Not awkward, but tender. The kind of silence you don't need to fill. He looked at me then, not in that overt, obvious way, but with a kind of gentle focus that made me feel seen. It had been a long time since someone looked at me like that. Really looked. Not as a mother or a neighbor or a widow, just me. I cleared my throat and stood, breaking the moment. "Well, I guess I should let you get back to your evening." "Thank you again, Henry. I'd have gone mad without my shows." He stood too, lingering a beat before nodding. "Any time," he said. "You know where I am." As I closed the door behind him, I leaned against it for a moment, heart quietly racing. It was just a neighbor helping with a TV, right? And yet, something about it didn't feel so simple. The next few days passed uneventfully, though I couldn't quite shake the odd flutter that had taken up residence in my chest. Every time I walked past the sunroom or flipped through TV channels, I found myself thinking of Henry, not in a giddy, schoolgirl sort of way, but more like a familiar melody I couldn't quite place. Soft, lingering. I hadn't expected him to come by again. It was a one-time favor, a neighborly gesture. But on Sunday morning, as I stepped out to tend to my roses, there he was, kneeling by his garden with a trowel in hand, wearing a baseball cap a little too big for his head, and humming something under his breath. I hesitated. He looked peaceful, like someone wrapped in his own quiet world. But then he looked up and caught my eye. "Morning," he said, smiling. "Morning," I echoed, brushing my palms on my jeans. "The tulips are coming in nicely." He glanced over at them. "Yours always come in first. Must be your magic touch." I laughed, though I felt my cheeks warm a little. Or beginner's luck. I still Google how to prune every spring. He stood up and dusted off his hands. "Listen, I was wondering. I made too much stew last night. Would you be interested in helping me get rid of the leftovers? I'd hate to waste it." I hesitated, not because I didn't want to. Truthfully, I hadn't had company at my kitchen table in a long time, but because something about his offer felt more meaningful than it should have. Still, I nodded. "That sounds lovely." Later that afternoon, I found myself sitting in his kitchen, a bowl of homemade beef stew steaming in front of me. The space was cozy, lived in. A couple of birdhouses sat on the windowsill, and photos of his kids and grandkids lined the top of a small hutch. We talked over lunch, and this time, the conversation dug a little deeper. He told me about his wife, Janet, how they met in college, how she used to make peach cobbler every Sunday, how cancer took her too fast. I shared bits about my own late husband, the years of laughter and frustration and compromise, about the quiet house he left behind, and how the silence had a way of settling into the walls. There was a moment where we just looked at each other. No words, no explanation. Just understanding. Two people who had weathered life's storms and were still standing, still showing up, still trying. "Do you ever feel like you're waiting for something?" I asked him quietly, not even sure why the words came out. Henry set his spoon down and tilted his head slightly. I used to. Then I realized maybe it wasn't something I was waiting for, but someone. I swallowed hard. There was nothing suggestive in his tone. Nothing forward or pushy. Just a simple truth, spoken gently. And somehow, that made it even more disarming. After I helped clear the dishes, I lingered by the door a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you," I said, "not just for the stew, for the company." He gave me that soft smile again, the one that didn't try too hard. "You're always welcome here." I nodded, feeling a strange ache beneath my ribs. Not sadness, exactly. Something deeper. Something like hope. As I walked back to my house, I noticed how the wind rustled the trees just slightly, how the afternoon sun had dipped into that golden glow I always loved. There was no dramatic music, no fireworks, no sweeping gesture. Just the faint sense that something had shifted between us. Something small, but real. And that night, as I curled under my blanket and the TV flickered in front of me, I didn't pay much attention to the show. My thoughts were back in that warm kitchen and with the man next door. The next week brought with it a strange, comforting rhythm. Henry and I didn't make formal plans. There were no scheduled dinners or pretense of neighborly duties. It was more like a quiet agreement. Some evenings I'd catch him sitting on his porch with his carving tools and a mug of tea, and I'd wander over, pretending I just happened to be passing by. Other times he'd drop off a few tomatoes from his garden or a slice of something he'd baked, banana bread, cornbread, things that tasted like time and care. We didn't talk about what was happening between us, but it was there. In the way he'd look up before I even knocked, or the way I'd find myself brushing my hair or changing my blouse before stepping outside. One evening, just after dinner, I heard a knock on my door. It startled me. Henry usually waited for me to come over, and I found myself oddly nervous as I opened it. There he stood, holding a small wooden box in his hands. "I was working on this," he said, eyes scanning mine. "And I don't know. I just thought maybe you'd like it." He handed it to me with a kind of quiet reverence. It was smooth to the touch, carved from cherry wood, with a delicate flower etched into the lid, one of those blue ones from his garden. I ran my fingers over the design, heart fluttering. "It's beautiful," I whispered. "Henry, I don't know what to say." He shrugged slightly, but his eyes were full of something unspoken. "You don't have to say anything." I invited him in. The house smelled like cinnamon from a candle I'd lit earlier, and the lamps cast a golden glow over everything, making the room feel softer, warmer. We sat in the sunroom again, and this time I brought out 2 glasses of wine. I don't usually drink during the week, but tonight felt different, like something deserved to be toasted, even if we didn't name it. "You're very talented," I said, nodding toward the box. He chuckled. "It keeps my hands busy, helps me think." "What do you think about?" I asked, not quite looking at him. There was a pause. "You," he said quietly. I looked up, heart thudding. There it was. I don't know what I expected in that moment. Maybe I'd laugh it off. Maybe I'd change the subject or pretend I hadn't heard him. But I didn't do any of that. Instead, I said, "I've been thinking about you too." We sat in silence after that, the kind of silence that doesn't need to be filled. The air felt heavier, charged, but not uncomfortable. He looked at me, really looked, the way he had that first day in the sunroom. And this time, I didn't look away. "You know," he said, voice low, "when Janet died, I thought that part of my life was over. Not just the marriage, the connection, the feeling of being seen." I nodded, understanding more than he knew. I felt invisible for years, I confessed, even when I'm surrounded by people. Especially then, actually. "You're not invisible," he said softly. "Not to me." And there it was again, that quiet truth between us. Not rushed, not forced, just real. He didn't reach for my hand. He didn't lean in. He just sat there with me, sharing the space, the moment, the weight of everything unsaid. Eventually, he stood to leave, and as I walked him to the door, I felt something settle in me. Something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. Possibility. Before stepping outside, he paused, turned back. "Would you like to come over for dinner tomorrow night?" he asked. I was thinking of making peach cobbler. I smiled. "I'd like that," I said. And I meant it with every part of me. Henry's house smelled like cinnamon and baked fruit when I walked in the next evening. It was one of those soft, golden hours where the sun hangs low and everything outside looks like it's been painted in honey. He greeted me with an apron dusted in flour and that same gentle smile, that had started to feel like home. "Dinner's almost ready," he said, "but I may need a second opinion on the cobbler." I laughed as I stepped inside. That's a lot of pressure. What if I'm a tough critic? "Unwilling to take the risk," he said, his eyes warm and teasing. The table was set simply, no fancy linens, just 2 plates, cloth napkins, and a small vase of those little blue flowers from his garden. The effort didn't scream romance. It whispered it, quietly, respectfully. We talked over roasted chicken and green beans with almonds, the kind of comfort food that tasted like time and care. Conversation came easy now, like old friends who'd finally started saying the things they used to only think. After dinner, he brought out the cobbler, golden and bubbling, with a scoop of vanilla ice cream already melting on top. I took a bite and closed my eyes. "Okay," I said, pretending to be serious. "This may be the best peach cobbler I've had since 1994. Henry laughed. "I'll take that as a win." We moved to the living room afterward, where the lights were low and an old jazz record played faintly in the background. I sat on the couch, and he sat beside me, not too close, but closer than before. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. There was a comfort in the silence, a kind of peace that comes when 2 people stop pretending they're strangers to each other. At one point, he turned to me, voice soft. "I hope this doesn't sound foolish, but I like being around you. It feels easy, right." I looked at him for a moment, at the faint lines around his eyes, at the way his hands rested calmly in his lap, at the man who'd shown up in small ways that had somehow changed everything. "It doesn't sound foolish," I said. "It sounds true." He reached out then, not boldly, not dramatically, just offered his hand between us, palm up, like a question. I placed mine in his. Warm, steady, familiar. We sat like that for a long time. No rush, no need to name anything. Eventually, I leaned my head on his shoulder, and he let out a breath I didn't know he'd been holding. Outside, the world continued on. Cars passing, a dog barking in the distance, the last birds calling it a night. But inside, it felt like time paused, just for us. A few weeks later. Things didn't change overnight. We still lived in our own houses, still had our own routines, but now there was a quiet thread tying our days together. Morning check-ins, shared meals, the occasional laugh over how much I still didn't understand about HDMI cables. There were no declarations, no big promises, just presence. And oddly, that felt like enough. More than enough. One afternoon, I was sitting in my sunroom, the wooden box Henry made resting on the windowsill. I had filled it with old letters and photographs, pieces of a life that once felt far away, but now somehow closer. I watched the sunlight hit the lid, bringing out the grain in the wood, the flower carving catching the light. I thought about how unexpected all of this had been, how a broken TV had led to a conversation, which led to a meal, which led to something quietly extraordinary, not a fairy tale, something real. And at this point in life, real is far more precious than perfect.